As-Salamu Alaikum. As-Salamu Alaikum. As-Salamu Alaikum. Welcome to another evening of Learning Islam with Masjid As-Sabur, Sacramento. My name is Haazim Rashid. I am the Imam of Masjid As-Sabur, and I want to welcome you to this evening where we're going to be discussing the history of Al-Islam in America. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the history of Al-Islam in America because it is so intertwined with the history of black people in America. But before we begin, we always begin Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, with the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lahu. I openly bear witness that there is no God but the one God, Allah, and I openly bear witness that Muhammad, to whom the Quran is revealed, is his slave, servant, and apostle. As-Salamu Alaikum. May God's blessings and peace be upon you. So as we begin this discussion, I think it is relevant for us to understand that Islam came with many of the African people that were taken into slavery. It is estimated that somewhere between 50 and 30% of the people that were enslaved and brought to this country came from Islamic countries, and many of them practiced Islam as their religion. So when they came to this country, it is interesting that many of them were forced to convert, i.e. to become Christian. There's even a story about some Muslims who, in order to practice their religion, started calling their God Allah, God, and that their prophet was Jesus, so that they could practice the religion of Islam and not incur the wrath of their Christian slave masters. But they were still Muslim and still tried to practice the religion. Now, what distinguished the Muslim slaves from everybody else? One of the things that distinguished them was they were literate. Many of them could read and write, and they could communicate in their native language. The other thing that distinguished them is that Islam embodies a system of practice that in many instances had a disciplined approach to their life, so that they were a little bit more distinguished from those slaves that came from a more pagan culture, and they were a little bit more regimented because they had been used to practicing a religion that has specific requirements. Now, the reason that I wanted to talk about that is because as you research into the slave trade, there are stories about Muslims who were in slavery and were discovered by people that had met them in Africa or even met them in their royal houses in Africa, and then remembered them when they saw them in slavery. We even have stories of princes that were enslaved in America and then freed as a result of the intervention of people that they had hosted when those people visited their home countries. The reason I want us to understand this is because a lot of the conversation today seems to imply that Islam is a totally foreign religion to this country, when, if you go back in history, Islam has been in this country since before we were an official nation. And here's one of the ironies. When America declared its independence, one of the first countries to recognize it as an independent country was the Islamic country of Morocco. So even then, that relationship between Islam in America was formally and from a, I guess, foreign state status established at that time. Now, I know we have to set everything in the context of our religion, so I'd like to begin with a reading from a chapter of the Holy Quran called The Expansion. And it refers to the expansion of Prophet Muhammad's breast. And it reads this way: Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, with the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge with God from the rejected enemy. Have we not expanded thee thy breast, and raised high the esteem in which thou art held, and removed from you the burden which had weighed upon your back? Verily, with every hardship there will be relief. Verily, with every hardship there will be relief. The reason I wanted to begin with that is because when Al-Islam was introduced into this country, it was opposed because the mantra of slavery was that the Africans were being removed from a pagan religion and a pagan society. But Al-Islam is not a pagan religion. It is one of the Ibrahimic or Abrahamic religions, in that we trace our origin back to Prophet Abraham. Prophet Abraham had two sons, Ishmael, Isaac or Ishak, and they are the source of all of our monotheistic traditions in the West. Jacob, Isaac, led through the Jews, and then from them to the Christians. Ishmael led to the Muslims. So we both go back to our joint father, Ibrahim, or Abraham. Now, why is that so critical? Because you see, today when people begin to talk about the religion of Al-Islam as some sort of foreign concept, nobody talks about the fact that we in the Muslim tradition have the same origin in our father of our religion as the Christians, which is Abraham. The other thing that people don't like to acknowledge is that this religion has been practiced in this country since before its creation. So, yes, there are an influx of Muslim immigrants in the last roughly 75 to 80 years that have really grown the religion, but prior to their influx, we had a lot of Muslims who came up from the slave tradition, and then also from the black nationalist tradition. There was the establishment of Islam through groups like Noble Drew Ali and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. These groups all taught about Islam, though in many instances their description of the religion was not necessarily a reflection of the pure religion, but it was a reflection of their resistance to the current oppression that they were facing in this country. As they grew in knowledge about the religion, they came to embrace the true religion of Al-Islam. But again, for people of color in this country, we as African Americans have basically a history in the religion of Al-Islam, whether absolutely perfectly performed or not, that traces back at least 100 to 150 years. The reason that I want to emphasize that is because as we talk about Black History Month, we have to remember that part of our Black history is our religious heritage from the countries that we came from in Africa. Many of the countries that we came from in Africa were Muslim. And many of those traditions that we don't even know why we do them come from that sort of society. Why do we like to sing so much? One of the things that is noteworthy in traditional Islam is what we call the Adhan. The Adhan is the call to prayer. And the best reciter during the time of Prophet Muhammad of that call to prayer was a black African ex-slave, Bilal ibn Rabah. And it was said that when he called the Adhan, everybody who heard it had tears in their eyes. Now, what do we do in this country? We have gospel, and we have reestablished under the Christian banner that whole call to faith and call to belief. But again, in the Muslim world, we also established that call to faith as well. Let's look further. As we go back in history, one of the things that Muslims exemplify is a devotion to God that transcends our individual life. What do we mean by that? Well, one of the stories about Bilal ibn Rabah, the slave I was mentioning who became the caller to prayer, his slave master, when he heard he had become Muslim, said he was gonna punish him until he gave up the faith. So what he started doing to this man was laying him out in the hot desert. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been to Saudi Arabia, but it can get as hot as 120 degrees or more in the sun. And the sand reflects that same temperature. So he would stake him out in the sand, and then he would take boulders and put on his chest, making it difficult for him to believe. And he'd ask him, how many gods? How many gods? The only answer he ever got was Bilal holding up one finger, because he couldn't talk. Now look at a lot of the faith that our people have exhibited throughout history. Black people in America have been willing to die for their faith. Dr. Martin Luther King had a phrase that I thought was very telling. He said, if there is nothing in your life worth dying for, is there anything in your life worth living for? Now, why is that a critical statement? Because if you are not willing to put yourself on the line enough to sacrifice your life for what is important to you, are you really willing to live fully for that which you believe? Now, we all like to say, I believe, but now when you put that kind of phrase around that statement, whew, a whole bunch of people back up and go, no, I ain't ready to do that. I'm cool with marching, I'm cool with carrying signs, but no, man, I ain't dying for this. But in order for progress to be made, sometimes people have to be willing to sacrifice their life for what they believe in. But again, Dr. King espoused a philosophy of nonviolence. As Muslims, we don't espouse a philosophy of nonviolence, but we do espouse a philosophy of justice, which means we don't condone the destruction of even a tree or a plant that's not necessary for a battle. We don't condone the killing of innocents. We don't condone any fighting except in a war. And we want that fighting to be between armies and not civilians. All very much tied to a commitment to doing things in a just manner. And so in this country, our history has been one where we have lived, we have cooperated, and we have grown under this system. Even when we didn't fully know what the religion was, I still remember the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam would give every member a card. And the card would say on it, if this man is caught breaking the law, put him in jail and send us the card. Why? Because we never condoned breaking the law or doing those things that were not in accord with a peaceful change and growth in society. That's why I like the verse that we began. Have we not removed from thee the burden of which did oppress thy back? Now, why is that important? If you look at the history of Islam in this country, especially among black people, our history shows that we came up with everything about our religious nature being oppressed. Man, it was almost illegal for people to learn the Bible during slavery, which meant no literacy. It was almost a crime to gather too many people together of color. That's even a crime today. If you get on the street corner and there are too many black people, the police roll up and go, hey, y'all move on. And in spite of that, the condition of African Americans in this country has improved. The condition of African American Muslims have improved. We've grown beyond just being black Muslims to being Muslims. We've grown beyond a small nation of Islam to becoming a part of the wider community of Islam throughout the world, so that we are now able to join with our brothers and sisters who are Muslim from every country in the world and practice our faith. Now, why is that critical for us? Again, when we come back to the history of Al-Islam in America, during the dark times of the early civil rights movement, during the dark times of repression during the 50s and 60s, the Nation of Islam was looked upon with terror by white America. Why? Because they felt these were the black people that would fight them, and these were the black people they had to worry about. And yet and still, we were the most orderly, the most organized. We had businesses, we developed an economy, and all that was done in the midst of this country. You know, when we look at the history of mosques in America, most of the mosques pre-1960 are African American mosques, set up by the Nation of Islam and set up all around the country. In addition to that, there was a small cadre of traditional, or what we call Sunni African American Muslims that had been here since the early 1900s. So that they were practicing traditional Islam, speaking Arabic, learning the Quran in Arabic, and exhibiting traditional Islam for almost 70 years before, this country began to recognize them. And then in the 60s, after El-Hajj Malik Shabazz scared the white world to death, people began to recognize Islam. And that was also when immigration started to bring in doctors, engineers, teachers, professors from the Arab countries that came to this country and began to develop a stronger base of Islam and establish more masjids. If we look around Sacramento right now, we have roughly 11 masjids. Of those 11 masjids, only 2 are predominantly African American. If we had gone back 30 years, we might have had 4 masjids, and 2 of the 4 were African American. So Islam is growing in this country. It's the fastest growing religion in this country. It's growing among Caucasian Americans. It's growing among immigrant Americans. It's growing among Black Americans. It's growing among every group, including Latinos and Asian Americans. When we look at the breakdown of Muslims in America today, the largest single community is South Asian. If we look, African Americans are roughly 25% of the total Muslim population and growing. When we think about what's been happening in our country, we have seen Islam come in and help revitalize some of our neighborhoods. How does Islam revitalize neighborhoods? Well, we don't like drugs. We don't like prostitution. We don't like alcoholism. And we don't like basically bad behavior. So when you come in and you give a better example and you not confront, but basically establish a standard that says certain things will not be allowed, people who can't conform to that standard leave. And when they leave, the people that really appreciate that standard are able to breathe more freely and to become more comfortable in their own community and to feel like they have the opportunity to reinvest in their community and develop their communities. And so everywhere we have a positive influence through an African American Muslim community, we have seen these changes begin to occur. So when we talk about, Black history, we have to include communities like Noble Drew Ali. We have to include the Nation of Islam. We have to include the Moorish scientists, because these are all organizations that brought order and structure and a degree of dignity to African American people at a time when they were being lynched in the South, at a time when the KKK was running rampant all throughout the South, and at a time when America did not want to acknowledge the humanity of people of color. So we have to give those Islamically based organizations credit for what they were able to achieve in Black History Month. And I just want to reiterate that, because it is critical that we acknowledge all of the factors that have influenced the growth and development of African Americans in this country. One of the things that I am very concerned about is we are not grateful to those who came before us that may have even laid down their lives to give us the kind of a society that we have now. I am shocked sometimes when I talk to people about Dr. Martin Luther King and they don't realize the things he had to go through in order to help us achieve where we are today. So as we close, I want to remind everyone, Almighty God blesses people with what they strive for. And the question I want everyone in this audience to ask themselves, what are you striving for? What is important enough for you to want it, sometimes even more than life itself? And then if you have found that thing, then let's see you put into practice the steps that will enable you to reach that goal. God has told us, strive together in a race towards all that is good. He knows what we're doing. I want to close as I open with the greetings of all of the prophets, from Abraham to Muhammad, the greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Again, I want to remind you, Masjid As-Sabur, Sacramento, we meet every Friday at 1:30 p.m., 4926 15th Avenue, Sacramento, California. We have a beautiful new facility. We want you to come and pray with us. And all are invited. You know, God has blessed His houses of worship to be open to all. And we open our arms to all. Thank you again. May God bless you with peace and understanding. Amen. Assalamu alaikum. I want to remind everyone, Masjid As-Sabur, 4926 15th Avenue. Our new masjid is gorgeous. We just finished planting over 100 plants in front of the masjid. We just got through cleaning up the kitchen and getting ready to clean up all of the wudu stations. And we want you to come and join us. Every Friday, 1:30 p.m., Masjid As-Sabur, Sacramento. We are also on the web, www.masjidassabur.org. And we're on Facebook, so please like us. Again, we thank you for your patience and your time. We want to remind you that God truly has a message for you. And we want to remind you that we are here to give you any help that you may need. As God has taught us, He is a merciful God. As long as you come to Him and ask forgiveness, He will forgive you. So no matter where you are in life, there is a hope for change.